Thank you, Metropolis, for giving me this opportunity. Today's talk includes a few slides, mostly on the front end, but basically you got to listen to me. I'm going to be speaking really about the U.S. context. My title is Building Resilience to Violent Extremism with Muslim, Refugee, and Immigrant Communities. A few weeks ago, Dennis McDonough, who's Deputy National Security Advisor to Barack Obama, spoke before a group of Muslim Americans in Virginia. And he said, "We know, as the President said, that the best defense against terrorist ideologies is strong and resilient individuals and communities." So is it possible to help U.S. Muslim diaspora communities to become more strong and resilient with respect to their young men entering violent extremism? U.S. officials say that it is, and they're introducing some new initiatives, specifically community engagement for intelligence gathering, community engagement regarding youth issues, and community policing. So one, over the past several years, the FBI in Minneapolis has learned to devise more community-friendly approaches to working with Somali Americans in order to secure that community's cooperation for criminal investigation and for intelligence gathering. They've been holding town hall meetings, doing community outreach, and training community deputies. In February 2011, the Homeland Security Department convened a youth summit for Somali Americans in Minneapolis that was attended by 40 or more youth, and more such events are promised. And most importantly, law enforcement has been applying to Muslim diaspora communities the community of policing approach that's been used to combat gang violence in urban America. So community policing involves traditional police approaches of reacting to crime, plus more proactive approaches of solving community-level problems in partnership with community. And the Los Angeles Police Department has in particular been pioneering this, and they've developed a program that involves a monthly community forum, a Muslim liaison police officer, and regular engagement with local mosques. This has gotten a lot of positive feedback in the community and is being seen as a national model. Because each of these efforts represent national policy efforts to engage local communities and work cooperatively, I think they're steps in the right direction and should be supported. However, the question I ask is, do they dig deep enough into the structural, sociocultural, economic, familial, emotional dimensions of communities to be effective? So in order to approach that question and to tell you more about Little Mogadishu, I'm going to tell you more about Little Mogadishu, which is the Somali American community in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I'm going to tell you about the events that have transpired over the last few years. Policymakers and the media have called it homegrown terrorism. I think of it as the interaction between these three forces: extremist militant organizations, failed state, and challenges in diaspora. Does it move? There. These processes produced the first U.S. citizen suicide bomber, Shirwa Ahmed, on October 29, 2008, and the U.S. government allowed his body to be buried in Minneapolis. Between late 2007 and 2008, 18 or more Somali adolescents and young men left the Minneapolis area secretly and flew to Somalia in order to join militant extremist camps run by Al-Shabaab extremist organization. It happened in two waves. The first wave was a little bit older, the second a little bit younger, and the second a little bit more academically inclined. The second wave included Burhan Hassan, a 17-year-old high school senior and an A student who wanted to go to Harvard, as well as other high school and university students, which I think dispels the commonly held assumption that only losers or the mentally ill join terrorist organizations. Terrorism scholars think in terms of the role of push and pull factors. So we could think of push factors as really broad impacts such as war and forced migration, living in refugee camps, poverty. And we could think of pull factors as being more discrete in time and space, such as the U.S.-backed Ethiopia invasion, the rise of Al-Shabaab, internet exposure, and especially recruiters. Now, there are believed to be 60,000 Somalis in Minnesota, which is the largest population outside of East Africa, I believe. And the important point is they came mainly to Minnesota through secondary migration from other spots in the U.S., which means that the federal dollars don't follow them in order to do things like arrange housing or build social services. Many live in Cedar Riverside in the towers, which is also known as the crack stacks. We think of these youth as Generation 1.5 Somali Americans. So they were born in war-torn Somalia, they were raised in refugee camps in Kenya, and then they lived in a ghettoized U.S. community where they watched the war in Somalia on YouTube. They were, of course, too young to experience the war directly, but they lost family members and they heard a lot of talk about the war. Their parents that brought them into the U.S. to get away from all of that actively discouraged any talk of the war. So the youth had little opportunity for dialogue with parents or elders concerning the meanings and implications of war and conflict and extremism in relation to their lives, in relation to this culturally prescribed Somali warrior tradition. So I asked, did this combination of excess of images and absence of full articulation create fertile ground for extremists to sell their message of stories combined with ideology? I believe yes in 4 senses. 1, the young men had a hunger for stories that their parents couldn't satisfy. 2, young men had a lack of understanding about war in Somalia and what it was really like. 3, parents really struggled about how to support and guide young men in the diaspora in the U.S. during a time of war, extremism, and ghettoization. And they had complete trust in the mosque to shepherd the development of these young men. All of this and more made it very easy for former fighters who were men to tell engaging stories about the war in Somalia that convinced the boys to leave their families secretly and to go to Somalia. Now, returning to my overall argument, in U.S. policy circles, one key concept being used to articulate what new programs could do is that of resilience. Resilience is a term borrowed from engineering, where it refers to the capacity of a material or a system to bounce back after some stress. Community psychologists refer to resilience in terms of the process of capacities helping human systems to adapt to a disturbance after adversity. Now, strong and resilient individuals and communities defend against terrorist ideologies. That's what we're being told by policymakers. And it is possible to create programs and policies to enhance their strength. Now, such rhetoric, to me, makes the job look simple and straightforward. We just need to press the button, and that enhances resilience to terrorism. But having worked, like I think many of you, in refugee communities for more than 20 years, I know that that isn't easy. We haven't yet found or implemented the strategies to enhance resilience for ordinary problems, such as high school dropout, domestic violence, or criminal involvement. And doing so would involve a major transformation in refugee services, let alone counterterrorism. I'm concerned we haven't built the scientific or practice knowledge base that would inform such services, though some of us, I know, are trying. Presently, we're conducting an ethnographic study of Somali Americans in Minneapolis in collaboration with community members. And this builds on our longitudinal and intervention studies in other refugee communities. And our approach to the idea of resilience is to focus on family and community protective resources, by which I mean characteristics of families and communities that mitigate against negative outcomes, which can include violent radicalization. So one example is we ask, who in a community protects? Who provides protection? And here I show some of the people that could do that.